It's time, Cougar Nation. Cougar Tracks. The best season analysis with BYU insider Mitch Harper on KSL News Radio and on video every day on the YouTube page for KSL Sports.
Welcome into Cougar Tracks here on the KSL Sports YouTube and KSL News Radio, your legacy home of the Cougars. It's Tuesday, November 25th, and I am your BYU insider, Mitch Harper. We are 4 days away until BYU football closes out the regular season against the UCF Knights this Saturday in Provo, and then BYU basketball returns to action. They'll take part in Feast Week coming up on Thanksgiving against the Miami Hurricanes here in Florida at Disney World. So that's going to be a lot of fun. It's a loaded week for BYU sports, but we got to start things off with BYU football as the Cougars are looking to close out this 2025 season on a high note.
The top story of the day. The biggest story in the world of BYU sports right here on Cougar Tracks.
All the attention now for 10-1 BYU turns to the UCF Knights. And BYU, it's pretty simple. You win, and you are in the Big 12 championship game. What's also of note, though, you don't want to explore these situations, but they are out there. BYU could still get in even if they lost to UCF. Here are all the scenarios for BYU in regards to reaching the Big 12 championship game. The easiest path and the most logical, simply beat UCF, and you're punching your ticket to Arlington. Another path, Arizona State loses to Arizona. That's very possible. It's a game in Tempe this week. But if Arizona State loses, BYU is in. Or BYU loses to UCF, plus Texas Tech loses to West Virginia, and Arizona State and Utah win. Again, just take care of business and take down UCF, and you should be fine, BYU. But this UCF team, I don't think they're great. It's first year under Scott Frost for the Knights. He returned after a bit of a gap between his time at Nebraska. He spent some time in the NFL, but obviously he was at UCF in 2017 when they claimed a national championship, went undefeated. They were atop the college football world with Scott Frost. This year it's been a bit up and down. I think that was kind of expected for UCF, but as Kalani Sitake knows, though, nothing is easy in the Big 12 Conference, and Kalani is sending that message home to his guys.
You look at what's going on in the Big 12 Conference. Nothing's easy, So you look at the games that happened over the weekend, a lot of tight games, and we remember being in a position where they're playing for a lot right now. They're playing for bowl eligibility, and we're playing for a lot too. So there's a lot riding on this game. Just want to find a way to go 1-0 this weekend. Keep focus on our opponent and stay humble, stay hungry, and away we go. Just kind of doing the same things that we've been doing and trying to keep the momentum going.
If the BYU continues to do the things that they've been doing, they're going to be in a great spot. BYU, for once, is actually a sizable favorite entering one of these games. I mean, you look at BYU in the Big 12, it's always been about a field goal margin, or more times than not, BYU is an underdog. They are a sizable favorite against this UCF team that, quite frankly, is pretty overmatched. And the Knights come into this game, though, to a spot that BYU can relate to 2 years ago. Remember, 2 years ago in the regular season finale, BYU went on the road to Oklahoma State at 5-6 to Stillwater. Oklahoma State in that game 2 years ago, which oddly enough is still the last time that Oklahoma State won a Big 12 game. But go back to that spot in 2023 when the Pokes had Ollie Gordon at running back. He was the Doak Walker winner that year. Oklahoma State simply had to win that game, and they were going to go to Arlington to face the Texas Longhorns. BYU gave Oklahoma State everything they could handle. BYU was a 3-touchdown underdog in that game. They forced it to overtime, and then Oklahoma State pulled it off. BYU had a Isaac Rex fumble that sent Oklahoma State to Arlington, and BYU's season came to an end that year in the Big 12 at 5-7 overall. So maybe there's some parallels that can be drawn from that game 2 years ago for Kalani Sitake to make sure that his players are dialed in. I don't expect Kalani's players to take UCF lightly, but I do think it's an interesting side plot that UCF, they're looking for their 6th win coming into this game with 5-6. So the Knights have motivation coming into Provo.
We're expecting a lot. I mean, we were in that position a couple years ago, so we know exactly what their mindset's going to be, and there's a lot to play for on their side and also for us. And I mean, this is the simple thing is we want to win at home for our fans, but also for our seniors, and we won't, there's a lot riding on it for us too. So it's a big game for both sides, and we're going to get their best shot. We just need to make sure that ours shows up as well.
18 seniors are going to be recognized on Senior Day this Saturday, and many of which are starters on this BYU starting lineup, about 9 or 10. So half of this group, pretty impactful senior class for the Cougars, and we'll break down that senior class a little bit more tomorrow here on the program. But there's high stakes for both teams involved in this matchup, and BYU's the much better football team than UCF. Throughout the entire year, UCF has only won games at the Bounce House. They haven't won a game yet away from Orlando. And I think what could tell you a little bit about how UCF plays on the road, how they got hammered against Baylor earlier this month in Waco, and they only scored 3 points against one of the worst defenses in the Big 12, being the Baylor Bears. So I think BYU should be in a great spot here where they don't have to stress too much, but at the same time, the Big 12 is crazy. A lot can happen, and BYU has been one of those teams in the past when they first joined the league that can, potentially cause some headaches and chaos in this conference, and UCF's going to look to do that, and BYU's going to look to avoid what would be just a shocking upset. It really would be shocking to be the winningest program in the Big 12 since last year, and then of all games to lose this one. That would be pretty crazy for BYU. But remember last year they lost to Kansas in Provo. Cougars, of course, looking for a perfect home record. 6-0 on the table for BYU in this game. It'd be the first time they go undefeated at home since 2020 when they went 7-0 in that COVID season. Another big storyline going into this game against UCF. Again, kickoff at 11 a.m. Extended pregame will begin at 8 a.m. Myself and Kyle Ireland will have you covered for the Cougs and the Knights. Is the health of this BYU team. Obviously, Chase Roberts, he got banged up in the game against Cincinnati, but we also saw Bear Bachmeier grimacing in the fourth quarter. I asked Kalani Sitake about the overall health of his ball club heading into this game against UCF.
Yeah, everybody's sore. I mean, Chase has got. I mean, obviously he couldn't go in the game, but we've got to make a decision on what's the best thing for him this week. And so, we'll evaluate that as we get closer towards the middle of the week. Bear's fine. The guys are tough, and LJ, those guys they're banged up. Everybody should be banged up right now in college football going into the last game of the season, so the regular season. So we don't expect anyone to be 100% until we get to Saturday. But we're gonna have to practice hard this week. We've got some sparring to do and get this team ready for this weekend. But the guys are banged up. That's the game of football. That's why we anticipate that happening, and we know it's going to be a painful process and part of it. So proud of the guys though. Then they'll find a way to get back and get healthy and be ready to roll. But mindset's got to be focused on working hard and getting it done.
Even in the final week of the regular season, BYU is going to some sparring, in the words of Kalani Sitake. Hey, just a quick side note, too. The 11 a.m. kickoff, it's very kind of outside the box for BYU home games. Obviously, BYU has been the team that just thrives at night. I was looking at that. 11 a.m. for BYU, 10 a.m. for Texas Tech at West Virginia. And then you look ahead to the next week, 10 a.m. Mountain Time in the Big 12 Championship, assuming both Tech and BYU get there. They've got pretty much the same amount of time in preparation to gear up for that quick turnaround to Texas on that Saturday in a morning spot at AT&T Stadium. So when you kind of size it up that way, it makes a lot more sense to have an early kickoff, but at the same time, it is a little bit weird to think of BYU football playing in the morning because that venue has become really iconic at night. It's crazy to think because 20 years ago, 25 years ago, it used to always be noon kickoff, death, taxes, and BYU football at noon. But now BYU thrives at night, but they maybe have a little bit of a throwback this week going to an 11 a.m. kickoff between the Cougs and the Knights. Let's take a break. On the other side, we'll get to more BYU football talk as get to know the Knights with the UCF Insider next, and also BYU basketball talk here on Cougar Tracks, and it's powered by KSLSports.com. Welcome back into Cougar Tracks here on the KSL Sports YouTube. Every day, we're talking BYU sports here on Cougar Tracks and KSL News Radio, daily at high noon here on the podcast feed, KSL Sports YouTube, and then every weeknight, 6:30 p.m. on KSL News Radio. So appreciate all of you for tuning into the show, watching the show, liking videos, subscribing to the KSL Sports YouTube, subscribing to the show on your favorite audio podcast feed. Appreciate all of you for being part of the program. So BYU basketball, I'm out here in Florida. It's kind of weird. I'm going to be traveling to a BYU football home game, but BYU basketball is gearing up for a Thanksgiving matchup against the Miami Hurricanes here in Florida. BYU going to take on the Hurricanes in Disney World at the State Farm Arena. Tip-off will be at 3 p.m. on Thanksgiving Day, 2 p.m. pregame here on KSL News Radio. And the Cougars remain at number 9 in the AP Top 25 poll, which kind of surprising to me because I honestly thought that BYU should be a little bit higher than that, considering the way that they hammered the Wisconsin Badgers 98-70 at the Delta Center last Friday. That was as dominant of a performance as I've seen BYU put together against a nationally ranked team. It was impressive, and for some reason the pollsters just said, oh, they've already got a loss under their belt. They're not a team that should move up. Okay, I guess that's fine, but they crushed Wisconsin completely, and Richie Saunders was brilliant. And Richie just continues to get better with each passing game as he continues to settle in to playing alongside AJ and Rob Wright. Those three nearly average 60 points a game. Richie's averaging about 20 points per game. AJ's another 19.8. And then Rob Wright, about 16 as well. So BYU is just putting up some huge numbers offensively with their big three. But they're also getting great production, too, from guys like Dawson Baker. I thought he was excellent in that win over Wisconsin. I think what I ultimately look at with that game against the Badgers was that performance, to me, showed a little bit of a glimpse into how good and how dominant BYU can be, even in a game when A.J. DeBonsa is dealing with 4 fouls before the under-16 timeout in the second half. They can still put their foot down on the gas and completely crush you. And their spacing, I thought, was great in that game. It was just an all-around complete performance. Now, I still don't think they're at their peak by any stretch. It's, again, I think that was the type of performance that you could see replicated more often than not from this team. That's how good they were in that game, and I think it could be replicated. I don't think it was just, oh, what a flawless, perfect performance from KY's squad. Good luck trying to repeat that. No, I think that they could do that. That's just how good this team is, and Wisconsin's pretty solid. I don't think they're as good as last year's Wisconsin team. I'd be kind of surprised if Wisconsin was a top 16 seed in the NCAA tournament this year as they were a season ago, but I would expect that they're an NCAA tournament team. And, you know, Wisconsin is an up-tempo attack, and BYU defensively, I thought, too, that was their finest hour of the season on the defensive end, and it was just a complete performance by all accounts how good and dominant BYU was in that game to limit Wisconsin to 70 points, where they were living in the 90s in their scoring outputs. BYU just completely destroyed them. So I think they're coming into Florida with a lot of momentum. They're going to arrive here in Florida today. They always travel 2 days before an Eastern road trip. Then they've got a game on Thursday against the Miami Hurricanes, and then they'll play either Georgetown or Dayton in the second game, depending on if they play in the championship game or in the third place matchup, depending on the outcome of BYU and Miami. Which, by the way, BYU versus Miami, that's just, it instantly brings up nostalgia of Ty Detmer and the Hurricanes. Like, how can you not think of that when you see the stretch Y, the U? Don't you just instantly think of Ty Detmer going up against the Miami Hurricanes? Like, that's just what it registers to me. I hate the fact that BYU canceled the home and home with the Miami Hurricanes in football in the transition to the Big 12. I thought that was the dumbest move yet in scheduling, because I love matchups with the Canes, Miami, and coming down to Florida. There's going to be a great contingent of BYU fans. I've got family down here in Orlando, and they've been saying that a lot of BYU fans are planning to be at these games, so it would not shock me if you hear a lot of Cougar Nation down here in Florida for these games over the next couple days at Feast Week for BYU in the Terry's Chocolate ESPN Events Invitational. That's a mouthful, which you can listen to all the games here on KSL News Radio and read the coverage on KSLSports.com. Miami's a pretty good team this year. Jai Lucas, new head coach, comes over from Duke. He was on the staff under John Shire. They had their one loss to Florida. No shame there. They were pretty competitive against the Gators, but I think there's a pretty big gap between the caliber of team of BYU and Miami. But still, I think Miami is a much improved team this year under Jai Lucas. And they got Ernest Uday, a guy that played at TCU, formerly at Colorado. BYU didn't play Uday when he was at Colorado, but he was there last season at TCU. So it should be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to these MTEs. They're always a good time. Next year, BYU's MTE is the Maui Invitational in 2026. And it's been strange to watch the Maui Invitational. I watched the Arizona State game. Great win for the Sun Devils. They took down Texas in a thriller. Texas slipped on the floor, turnover, last possession of the game for a chance to go win it. Arizona State held on and won that game, but Maui Invitational doesn't have the same clout like it once did. Even a few years ago when BYU was in the Maui Invitational in 2019 when they beat UCLA and then were pretty competitive against Kansas, then got the third place finish by beating Virginia Tech. Maui was still rocking and rolling at that time. Now it's the Players Era Festival, which wall-to-wall games throughout the entire day in Las Vegas. Some awesome matchups. I was watching Houston versus Syracuse. That was a thriller. That was an excellent ball game. Watched Gonzaga and Alabama as well. But of note, with the Players Era Festival, we could see BYU in very short order. As a part of the landmark partnership, the Big 12 has established itself as the top conference in men's basketball over the years. They will see the top 8 teams in the Big 12 standings receive automatic bids in the future to the following year's Players Era Men's Championship, starting with the 2026 event and running through 2030. So potentially we could see an annual Thanksgiving tradition of BYU hoops going to Vegas and playing in the Players Era, which of course has a big payday for the winning teams. I think it's upwards to $2 million or $3 million for the winning team. There's $24 million involved in this year's Players Era event. So a lot of money to distribute to the players that are involved in these teams. So I think that's awesome that the Big 12 is going to be involved in that. And it creates potentially a situation where just annually consider BYU in the Players Era. And you mean to tell me BYU, with Cougar fans being able to plan, they would fill it up in Vegas and show out for that event. So that could be pretty cool. I'd be curious to see what happens next year with the commitment to the Maui Invitational. Does BYU back out of that and instead go to the Players Era Festival? We shall see, but that's something that's in the cards for Big 12 teams, not only BYU, but the rest of the Big 12, getting involved in that league. And I saw that CBS Sports' Matt Norlander reported that the deal's worth up to $50 million for the Big 12. So Brett Yormark bringing in more money for the conference and its members going forward as they continue to navigate this unique landscape of college sports. But again, I'll have full coverage of BYU basketball here in Florida at the ESPN Events Invitational. Cannot wait to see how this team shows up. I'll have more on the matchup coming up tomorrow between the Cougs and the Hurricanes here on Cougar Tracks. Taking our final time out, let's get to know the UCF Knights with an insider, Chris Boyle, next here on Cougar Tracks. Welcome back into Cougar Tracks here on KSL News Radio and the KSL Sports YouTube page. Mitch Harper with you. It's time to get to know the UCF Knights, 5-6 ball club, coached by Scott Frost. And to get to know the Knights, I caught up with Chris Boyle, UCF Beat Writer from the Daytona Beach News Journal, to discuss UCF football as they prepare to travel west, first visit to Provo since 2011.
Well, first off, let me go back to that game from 2011. How about Kyle Van Noy being BYU's leading tackle? That's a throwback. Like,
yes,
it feels like he's been in the NFL forever, and that we date all the way back to his college era with that game. Scott Frost's return at UCF has been interesting, I would say. It's been largely well received. I think most fans are pretty understanding with the amount of turnover that needed to happen this year. From a roster perspective, bringing in 63 new players is going to be, it's essentially year zero for this team. It's a entirely rebuilding year. And yet, when you think about it, at the end of the day, they've won more games than they did a year ago. They are 5-6. They were 4-8 last year with a better team, with a second round pick as a running back and RJ Harvey. That was the focal point of the offense. They beat the teams that they're probably supposed to beat on paper. When you look at beating teams in a very similar spot, North Carolina, they took care of business at home back in September. They handled West Virginia pretty easily, and West Virginia has actually looked pretty good since then. So that looks back, that ends up being a better win with the benefit of hindsight. And then Oklahoma State, a team that's struggled for 2 years in a row now. It wasn't easy, but they got it done and won that game last week, 17-14. So all things considered, I think when you look at it holistically, I think UCF's done an okay job in year one. The recruiting certainly has some question marks. There's not a huge high school class as things stand right now. I think a lot of work will be done in the transfer portal starting in January. But all things considered, I do think UCF is in a healthier position for competition's sake going into next year. Just from finding a few pieces that they think they hope to retain and that they hope they can build with, particularly on the defensive side of the ball.
UCF comes into the game 5-6 and looking to get one more win to go to the postseason. They haven't won a game on the road this season. What's been the big issue away from the bounce house for this UCF team?
I mean, take your pick. You can list a number of things that have gone wrong on the road. I mean, you start with just the scoring. They've averaged 10.8 points per game, 43 points in 4 games away from home. That includes a 30-3 loss at Baylor back at the start of November, and Baylor has been one of the worst defensive teams in the Big 12 this year. Pre-snap penalties have been a killer. Drive halters, particularly at Cincinnati, if you go back to that game in mid-October, felt every time they got any sort of momentum going, they had some sort of crippling penalty, whether it was a hold, whether it was a shot block, whether it was false starts, which were very routine in that game. That's been a major issue all year. And really for the first time all year, I feel like Scott Frost, after the Oklahoma State, more or less, waved the white flag. They are what they are, right? They are not going to solve that issue this year. They're going to hope it for next year. But I think particularly in an environment as loud as BYU is, and with the kind of players they have defensively, I don't really foresee that being any sort of a quick fix. I don't think it's going to be any better this week than it has been the 11 games previously. So that's one issue for sure. And the last 2 times they've gone on the road, their defense, which has been pretty solid all year long, has gotten into some quick holes. They were down 14-0 against Baylor in the blink of an eye. They were down 21-0 at Texas Tech, 1 play into the second quarter. They're not getting any help from their offense. As I mentioned, they're not really driving the ball very much. And they're sent back out into the field quickly, but they haven't started well defensively in either of those games. Although they have settled into them as the days wore on, I think that's definitely been an issue. They want to try to correct. They want to try to get BYU off the field or hold them to a field goal in the first quarter or so, and at least give themselves a puncher's chance.
Talk with Chris Boyle, UCF beat writer for the Daytona Beach News Journal. You can check out his bylines there and also follow him on X, Chris Boyle, DBNJ. And I'm curious, Chris, with this UCF team, I used to think with UCF, and they kind of branded themselves as the future of college football. Is there reason for optimism, regardless of what happens this weekend for UCF, that this thing's going to turn around and they're going to continue to build into the future and become really one of those programs that looks like they're always on the cutting edge, particularly offensively? Because I think for me, that's kind of what surprised me the most since they joined the Big 12, is that offensively they're just not the teams that I kind of identified UCF as in the past.
Yeah. When that quote was really a Gus Malzahn thing, and it was around when he took over in 2021. And I think at that time I was a bit more optimistic about it because the trajectory of the program, you go back to 2013, they won the Fiesta Bowl against Baylor. That was their first ever New Year's Six bowl game appearance and victory. They go back in 2017 and run the table, go undefeated in Scott Frost's first season. They go undefeated again in 2018, lose the Fiesta Bowl to LSU. But since then, it's been a bit of a gradual decline. They did make a bowl game the first year as a Big 12 program. They were 6-7. They played in the Gasparilla Bowl that year. But I think the biggest thing is that this future has coincided with just wholesale changes in the game. You look at Texas Tech, I think is obviously the prime example right now of what can happen with gigantic booster investment. And UCF does not have that. They do not have it, certainly to that degree. They have some, but they don't have Cody Campbell money. They don't have, the types of influential figures that can just simply cut a check to bring in whoever is needed at premium positions. And let's face it, the fortunes of Texas Tech have changed overnight, given the all-in mentality they had going into this year to go out and acquire premium established college football players and it has paid off for them. And I think that's what makes me a little bit more skeptical about UCF long-term, is I don't know if they're going to be able to recruit at that level. They're going to try. They're going to try to be smart about it. They're going to find guys and they've done pretty well in the portal. They found a good number of pieces that will help them not only this year, but should help them into the future if they can retain them. And I think, of course, that becomes its own challenge year on year to recruit your own roster. But on the whole, I think they are a team that I expect will be a winning program in the Big 12 eventually, but maybe with a ceiling that's a little bit lower than I think myself and UCF's fan base probably envisioned when they got the invitation to this league.
Looking at this game on Saturday, Chris, who are the key players to watch for UCF? If for a Cougar fan that's getting familiar with UCF, who are the players that they need to know?
Yeah, I'd start with the tight end as of late, Dylan Wade, who's an Orlando native, transferred back home after 2 years at Maryland and had a big game on Saturday against Oklahoma State. He had 4 catches for 145 yards, 2 touchdowns, started the second half with an 84-yard catch and run that was the longest passing touchdown of the season for UCF. So that was kind of that explosiveness that maybe you would assume from a UCF offense. It's just been very hit or miss throughout the year. Caught a touchdown on 4th down in the 4th quarter to tie the game as well. And then had a 50-yard reception up the seam that set up the game-winning field goal. So he's been very impactful as the year's gone on. He's caught at least 3 passes in his last 6 games. So I think certainly kind of the offense is really going through him right now. Same to be said about, Miles Montgomery as a leader. Depends on if he's available. I know the shoulder injury he's had has been bothersome to him, but he ran pretty well against Oklahoma State, and he's had his moments throughout the season. Defensively, this is a pretty good unit. I think they've done a really nice job. Alex Grinch got a lot of flack when he got hired as the defensive coordinator here, based on how things finished at USC. But I think he's done a very nice job making this a responsible unit that can go out and win a ball game. They held Oklahoma State to 27 yards, 1 first down on their last 6 drives, all encompassing for the second half, including a game-ending interception for Braden Marshall to wrap it up. Defensively, the players I think to watch, definitely the 2 defensive ends. Malachi Lawrence has 7 sacks. Nigel E. Kelly's been a force as well at various points of the season. Lewis Carter and Cole Kozlowski, I think, have done a really nice job in the linebacking room. 2 new additions, one from Oklahoma, the other from Colgate. You talk about 2 various ends of the spectrum. Then you've got the defensive backs, I would say. Jaden Bellamy has been really tough in coverage this year, and Philip Dunham set a program record for single-game interceptions. He had 3 picks against Houston, so and won Big 12 co-defensive player of the week honors. Those guys, to me, are among the standouts for what, again, has been a pretty good UCF unit, particularly at home.
And I wanted to ask you, too, another player, Taven Jackson. He wasn't the week 1 starter, but he's been the starter at quarterback pretty much the most of the season. Your thoughts on him? And, he's only a junior in terms of eligibility. Do you think this could be, win or lose, a springboard to next year as being QB1? What's your outlook on Taven Jackson?
It's been up and down, and I think that's kind of to be expected for a guy who's really coming into his first full year as a starter. He was expected to win the starting job coming into camp. To Cam Fancher's credit, he outperformed him and had the veteran leadership skills of having been a guy who started that week 1 game at 2 other schools in Marshall and Florida Atlantic. But he left before halftime in that first game, took a back injury, had some broken ribs against Cincinnati. And Jackson has been tough, if nothing else. I think you have to salute the guy's toughness. He's hobbled off the field even as recently as the second quarter on Saturday. He had a shoulder injury that he had against Kansas State where it looked like he was done for the day, if not for the year. He took his shoulder pads were off. They had to cut his jersey at Kansas State, and then he ended up going back into the game the second drive of the third quarter, which I've never seen before in all my years covering football, to see a guy go, take his shoulder pads off and then run back out there and play quarterback. So he's earned some respect, I think, certainly in the room and somewhat, I'd say, among the fan base. He's thrown 8 touchdowns, 8 picks. 7 of those 8 picks have come in the last 5 games, so it has been a bit bumpy. What he's got to do is he's got to show that he can perform and lead this team on the road. Even if it doesn't result in victory, I think they just want to see the ability to overcome adversity with the amount of struggles he's had away from home this year. And I think that will honestly dictate whether or not he ends up being the starter next year. I think there's certainly possibility of it, but I also think that they could be very aggressive in trying to find a bridge to their 2 true freshman quarterbacks coming in for 2026 as well.
Last thing for you, and again, talk with Chris Boyle of the Daytona Beach News Journal, covers all things UCF Knights. Check out his bylines there at the Daytona Beach News Journal. How do you see maybe the effort of UCF in this game? And I bring that up again because, coming out west, long travel, going to be a huge underdog. It's going to be cold. Do you expect this UCF team to bring a lot of fight to this matchup and try to make this interesting and maybe spring the upset on BYU?
So I think the cold's going to affect me more than it's going to affect the players. I'm not accustomed to this. I've never driven in snow before. I've never driven in snow before, and there's potential showers on Saturday, so I'm a little leery. I'm wondering whether I need to Uber to the game instead of renting a car. But I think the effort will be there. I think certainly there are players that are accustomed to that. Jackson's from Greenwood, Indiana, so that's not going to be overly foreign to him. Jaden Bellamy, we asked him about it earlier. He's a guy that's from New Jersey, played it the last couple of years at Syracuse, although they do play in a dome. Certainly he's familiar with walking around in some very small temperatures. So I think those guys will be up for the challenge. I think it's not going to be maybe as cold as we anticipated it potentially being. It's going to be cold, but I think there was certainly a chance that this game could have been in the teens, and it wouldn't have surprised me. But it's going to be closer to like 35, 40 degrees, and I think that's a little bit more in their wheelhouse. The problem is I just think they're outmanned. I just think this is a veteran BYU team that has an established culture, an established identity, an established attitude and air about it that I think is going to be something that UCF can't really compete with right now. Now, I don't think that's necessarily always going to be that way. I do think that at some point the gaps will narrow a little bit. But right now, with as much as BYU is playing for, with a dominant home record over the years that can't be undersold, I think BYU is just in position to really win this game and potentially do so in impressive fashion. Because I do think, and we talked about this on, when you came on with me earlier, I don't think it's necessarily about trying to prove a point or embarrass somebody, but I do think style points matter a little bit. I think you want to win this game by multiple scores to give yourself any sort of potential advantage or even a safety net if you don't beat Texas Tech in the Big 12 championship game to be in that at-large conversation. Because quite frankly, I thought BYU got jobbed last year. I thought, and I've got no problem going on record about this, we forgot. It's like everybody forgot they beat SMU in September last year. It baffled me that they weren't even really involved in the conversation for the at-large spot when they beat the team that was the last team invited. So to me, I think any sort of leg up you can get, and I think it helps to be able to show that the success has been sustainable from 2024 into 2025. But I think BYU just needs to go out there and take care of business and let everything kind of fall in place from there.
And that's Chris Boyle, UCF Beat Writer here on the Cougar Tracks podcast. Appreciate him for spending some time with me. I got the chance to hop onto his show as well, giving them an insider look at BYU football in 2025 as well. That's going to do it for this edition of Cougar Tracks. I hope all of you enjoyed it. Make sure to subscribe to the show, subscribe to the KSL Sports YouTube, like this video, and listen to the show and watch the show wherever you get your podcasts. And I'll talk to you tomorrow to get you ready for BYU and Miami here from Florida and talk more BYU football as we count down to Senior Day and the regular season finale right here on Cougar Tracks, and it's powered by KSL Sports.